Well, hello. My name is Katherine Goyette. I want to thank you for joining me for this MAD PD virtual presentation here. We're going to talk about no more boring student presentations and how to increase engagement when students are giving those oral presentations. So I want to thank you for joining us. I'm here in Central California. It's pretty early. I'm not a morning person, but I thought I'd try this. I do have the live chat going on the right of the YouTube channel. If you don't have the YouTube screen as full screen, you'll be able to chat on the side. So I will be watching that and moderating it. If anybody has any questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and just ask a question on the live chat. In fact, if you're on right now, if you wanted to go ahead and introduce yourself, let me know where you're from. And if there's anything specific that you wanted me to address, that would be great. This will also be archived on YouTube, so it's something that if you have any learnings and you want to share it with your team, with your colleagues, view it later, you can feel free to do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in a moment so that you can see the presentation, and I'm also going to put the link so that you can go ahead and view this yourself throughout as well. So let me get that up here. All right. Here we go. So I'm going to actually put this short URL here on the live chat also, so that you will be able to look at it anytime. It's going to actually come from Adam Juarez, because I'm using his computer here. There we go. That should work, I'm hoping. So here's the short URL if you wanted to check this out. My name's Katherine Goyette. I'm an educational technology and integrated studies consultant in Central California. And prior to this, I taught kinder, first, second, fifth, and sixth grade. And I was a coach at a school site where, I'll show you the pictures, but we were doing our assessments, and what I noticed, a couple things, students, they would go up and they were getting really excited because we started to roll out some technology. And so they started doing some multimedia presentations of sorts with keynotes and PowerPoints and, not quite Google Slides at that point when they weren't quite there yet. But what I found was they were excited and they wanted to show their learning in this new format, and yet their presentations were just not what they should be. I mean, the quality, they didn't know how to do public speaking. And then what happens to the rest of the class? When you do these presentations, I know that when I was a sixth grade teacher, half the year I had practically no technology. And the rest of the half of the year, we had one-to-one iPads. And so we were in a one-to-one environment. And once we got those iPads, the kids were super excited and wanted to use them all the time, which is great. And so they wanted to, rather than using the textbook, following that textbook, what was awesome was we started having the kids create, in a constructivist type model. They were creating their own knowledge. They were finding resources, they were doing research, and then they were creating these presentations to show me that they knew, that they knew this information. The problem was a couple things. When a group of students or a student is up at the front of the classroom giving that presentation, what is happening with the rest of the class? What's going on with that? What are they doing? And normally those kids, even if I asked them to take notes, they were sitting there bored. They really were. And so how do we do that? How do we fix that? And so we really took, I saw that as a problem when I was a teacher. And then when I was a coach at a school site, I saw the same thing happening. And I thought there's gotta be a way to engage the students to do two things. To number one, make these student presentations less boring, and to get these students to be better speakers and to have more exciting presentations that will engage their audience. And number two, to get the students that are listening to actually be actively involved. And so that's something that I did, we really focused on at that school site. I notice I'm way at the end of my presentation. Let me get this. Sorry, it's gonna, there we go. All right, so that's kind of what we're gonna talk about today. So why is speaking important? This is a picture that I took at school site I was at, where the students were giving a multimedia presentation. And so you'll notice it's a little dark, so I'm going to kind of explain the picture for you. In the back, you'll see that's actually a smart board where their presentation is projected onto the screen. And then you'll see a student holding an iPad, and the iPad is controlling what's happening on the screen. So that's where they advance to the next slides and such. Now, if you look at the picture, there are some problems with this. I was asked to come. These kids were so excited to share their learning with this presentation. And so I came in, and so, you know, I took pictures because they were really proud to show their learning. But if we look at this, what are the problems? If you're on the right now, and if you're on the chat and you wanted to, you know, put in some things, I'm going to write down on the chat some things that I've heard. You know, one thing I see is that the students are standing in front of the board, right? So if I'm trying to give a presentation and I'm standing right in front of it the whole time, that's a problem, right? That's one thing. What else do we see? What else is looking at that picture? What's wrong with that? I see another thing I hear often is the students aren't facing the audience. They aren't looking out. It's hard for me as a student sitting out watching my peers present information. It's hard for me to be engaged when they're not even looking at me, right? So that's another problem. Have they practiced this? You know, have they even practiced this? So those are some things that we're going to address in ways that we at our site and you know, how do we do that? How do we fix this? It's not just about what the presentation looks like, what the visuals are. That is something that's important that we're going to talk about. But I think something almost, you know, something equally important is that public speaking piece. Effective speaking is so important for our careers. We know that if we are able, those people, those adults that are able to do public speaking effectively have so many more opportunities than those that do not. And so that's something that we really want to provide for our students. We really want them to be able to do. And so how do we do that? What do we do? Something that you'll see, if you look back at the picture from before, I want you to look at this picture. This was the first year I came to a particular school site. And then we really focused on public speaking. We really focused on our multimedia presentations. And this is a picture of the next year, the end of the next year, when we really started to focus on this, because I saw this is a need. This was not working, and we really needed to address it. So we addressed it really at a school-wide level, gave some trainings and talked about it and learned together. And what you'll see in this picture, these students, or this student, actually prepared so well that we had the opportunity for the local news to come out and just do a special on the things that were happening at our school site. And we did a lot of cool stuff for the news. And what I thought was most exciting was the robotics and Sphero parts. I thought, oh, this is great. Look at all these things that the students are doing. They're coding the robotics, and they're using geometry and all this stuff. And so I thought that's what the news would be most excited about. However, they came to this classroom, and this is actually a classroom for reading development students, which is students that are reading below grade level and go in for extra support. And so these students were essentially giving these multimedia presentations, and While I thought the Spheros portion of the newscast was the most exciting, what the newscasters told me and what the videographers and everything told me is they were amazed at the public speaking skills of these students. And so they loved, they said, I have never seen students speak so well and do such great presentations. This is a skill. This is something that they can use in the real world. And so here these adults that go to schools all the time, I thought, oh, the flashy Spheros would be the most exciting part, the robotics, the coding. No, this is what they said. This is what schools should be about. And how did we get to this point? How do we get to the point that we had newscasters recognize this? That's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how we got to that point and how these students were so confident to be able to do that. I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm also going to talk about what were the other students doing. The students that were listening to this presentation, how were they showing their learning? How were they actively engaged in the process? Again, if you've just joined, feel free to, I have the live chat open, so if there are any questions that you have, please go ahead and you can introduce yourself and ask questions on the live chat on the side. One thing that was so effective and really increased the student motivation in the picture that you saw last was that the students knew that the public, people other than their teachers, people other than just their peers were going to see what they did. And so leveraging the power of an authentic audience is very, very crucial, and it's so helpful for getting that student motivation. Students will practice if they know that others will see what they do. And so ways we can do that, YouTube. Many, I work with a lot of districts though, and sometimes they will tell me, well, we have these, we have to protect student privacy, we have to do, and I get that because I was an administrator, and so I understand that student privacy is a concern, and it's something we have to be aware of, and we do have to protect our students' privacy. And so with YouTube, publishing something onto YouTube and keeping it unlisted instead of public is a great way to go. I actually did a mock trial. I had I collaboratively created an opportunity for students where they did a mock trial, and we recorded it and we put it on YouTube. And I had everyone that was in the video had a media release form, except one student did not. And so I went to the parent, and I said, your student, he's acting the part of an attorney, defense attorney, and he's doing such an awesome job. And what we want to do is put this video on YouTube. And I want to assure you that it's going to be an unlisted link, so it's not searchable. It's not something that others will see. We're not going to be, is this okay? Can you give me permission to allow your student to be on YouTube in that way? And what she said was, yeah, the problem I had was I just don't want you selling my students information. I don't want him publicized and you making money off of it or and I thought, oh, that's all? Yeah, no, we're definitely not doing that. So sometimes just having those conversations with those key parents makes a big difference. If you just let them know this is why we're doing this, that can be pretty powerful. So that's for YouTube. And if you, a lot of times teachers say, this is great, Katherine, what you're telling me, but I don't know how to publish things on YouTube. I don't know how to do that. But guess what? You have tech support in your classroom. It's called your students. Your students probably know how to do this. A lot of times that's one of teachers' fears about moving forward with technologies. They don't know. They don't know how to do this. Rely on your kids. Let them lead. Let them lead. They'll love it. And they know how to do this. So a lot of them have YouTube channels already. Another way to get this information out there is Blogger. That's what that B is. That's all through the Google Suite as well. And so with Blogger, you can upload videos And then you can actually have your students go in and make comments, and there's a lot of options with your privacy settings, so you can restrict it to your domain only, or you can make it public. So if you can still leverage that power of an authentic audience and yet have your students protected. As far as making sure that parents are involved and having that homeschool connection, using Remind or Class Dojo are things that you might want to look into as well. Parents and teachers love that also. This is something that, this is students that were doing a green screen presentation. And the reason I put this in here is to really talk about the power of that authentic audience. What happened is this occurred during summer school. I was principal at the summer school, and this was a school that none of my students from my home school were feeding into. So these kids didn't know me. And at my school, you know, I tweet stuff out. I had tweeted things out that were happening, pictures of kids, their videos, all the time. And I had forgotten that that had become a norm. And so when I'm at this summer school, this teacher that had been, you know, I brought over to the summer school that had been on my team before, she said, "Oh, Katherine, I have these kids. They literally are saying one sentence each on, you know, I'm making a video. They're saying one sentence. We're putting on a green screen. They're researching natural disasters, and then they each said one sentence about it. They were going to have pictures of natural disasters in the background." And she says they keep saying, "Can I come in before school? Can I come in during lunch? Can I come in after school? I need to practice. I need to practice." You know, and she's like, "I just couldn't figure out why they kept wanting to come in." And she said, so I asked them, you know, "Gosh, you guys are fine. You got your sentence down. Why do you keep wanting to practice?" And what they said is, "Oh, well, you know, Ms. Tyler, Ms. Goyette comes in and she takes pictures and we might end up on Twitter." So because the students knew that they might end up on Twitter, they might end up on a public place, they were willing to practice. How many times have your students, you know, we know that repeated reading, for example, reading something again and again and again, research shows that that is great for fluency and comprehension. But do our students really want to do that? It's super boring to read something again and again and again and again, right? How can you get your kids to do that? Tell them you're going to videotape them. Tell them it's going to be publicized. All of a sudden, they're going to practice more, and they will be motivated to actually do that public speaking, to practice that public speaking. If you are interested in using green screens, it's super engaging for kids. They love it. There's an app called Do Ink, D-O-I-N-K, and it's currently, I believe it's $2.99. And that's one that I think is probably the most simple to use, that a lot of teachers have used. But again, having the power of that authentic audience, then your students will practice. Then they will want to do that. There's differences between building a speech and performing a speech. And that's something that I think sometimes teachers and students, I think teachers forget about focusing on both. Students really do have to be taught to do both of those things. On the left, you'll see a picture of students that are getting ready for that newscast that you see on the right. And so they're going through as a team, and they are, you know, they're writing on the board there all of their plans. They're coming together, they're collaborating. How great is that for 21st century learning, that those students are having to think about, okay, what do we need to do for this newscast? How do we need to collaborate? Who are we going to interview? What are the steps we need to take to do this? And then how are we going to put this together to make it a presentation? So this is one, you know, the other thing that I wanted to mention too is that when you are asking, it's so important that students are speaking. But sometimes we feel, as a teacher, I felt I don't have time to listen to all of my students' presentations. And so what do I do? So there's one way is leverage the power of video. if you can have the students videotape each other, then you don't have to sit there and watch them every single time. You don't have to take those valuable instructional minutes. They can all be videotaping their speeches, their presentations at the same time, and then you can watch them at your leisure. Depending on your students' access to technology at home, this may not work for you, but if your students do have access to technology at home, you could assign those videos as homework, and then those students can listen to each other then. The other point is, if they're doing that, how do you know that those students watching that video or watching that presentation, that they're actually paying attention, right? You have to actually give them something to do, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. There's different ways that students need to speak, right? There's different purposes, and I think that's something that we sometimes forget about. So as far as building a speech, it's important that students know there's different ways to do this. So in this first example, we have on the top left there, this is an example. It's not really a multimedia presentation. These are students that it is multimedia in or using technology in the fact that they actually, prior to this, they had to research an individual from history. You'll see Cleopatra, I believe this is Cleopatra right here in the front. The students researched someone from history so that they could, on demand, answer questions about that character. They dressed up as the character, and then students, younger students from the school came by and were allowed to ask them questions about that character. So that was actually a really cool way to leverage cross-age collaboration and have students teach students and create those student leaders. But that's just as important. That's another creative way to not just have PowerPoints, you know, that's more engaging. And as you'll notice, this is something that saves time because instructional minutes are so important. We've got to use every single minute of the day. And for me as a teacher, when I was teaching 6th grade, what I noticed was all the kids wanted to, because it was pretty new, and they all wanted to get up and share their presentations, and yet it took too long. It felt like it was eating away my instructional minutes. And it was great, and I wanted to encourage them and allow them to have that authentic audience. At the time, I hadn't thought of actually, using the power of video, which I would do now. But what you'll see in this picture alleviates that, because guess what? Every single student is giving a presentation of sorts at the same time. They didn't go up in front of the class and give the presentation to the whole class. I'm Cleopatra. Let me tell you about who I am, blah, blah, blah. No, they're all doing it at the same time. So they spent some time allowing classes to come through and those students ask them questions, but it's all happening at the same time. I've also seen classrooms where they'll use kind of a four corners approach. And this is also great for those kids that are really nervous to speak in front of the whole class. This scaffolds them up to that point where they feel more comfortable. You lower that effective filter by having four corners, using all four corners of the room and having them present at the same time. So there might be group A in one corner, group B in another, group C in another, group D in another, and then the rest of the class is assigned to that group, and they're able to go and watch that speech and listen. So that's a way that you can really kind of leverage time, because it's so important, especially if you've got administrators that are telling you, you've got to keep with these pacing guides, you've got to make sure you cover all this stuff. Yeah, but I want to make sure my kids are able to speak effectively and create those multimedia presentations. And I want them to be able to present them. Oh, sorry, we don't have time. This is a way that you can address that, which is definitely a true problem that we need to address. The next picture on the kind of bottom left there is a picture of my former superintendent at a district I was at, great guy, Matt Navo. And this is an example of a different kind of, this is an actual PowerPoint type of a situation. And kids need to be able to do both, right? Kids need to be able to build a speech such as in the first picture, but also to do what he's doing, which is to create something based on this audience. So students need to know that there are different ways that we present for different purposes. With thinking about, if you look at the rubric there on the side, thinking about that audience, right? And so if you think of the audience, the students knew when they were giving those biography presentations, they knew that the audience was going to be younger students. And so their teacher told them, hey, these students, you've got to make it simple for them to understand. They're younger than you. They're first graders and second graders and even kindergartners. And so thinking about that first was important. Teaching them about how important it is of how you dress. So you look at Mr. Navo down at the bottom there, he dressed appropriately for a presentation that he was giving to aspiring administrators. And so teaching students that we have to consider that. And in that venue, it wasn't really a question and answer type event. So he needed to make sure that his PowerPoint, that his presentation had a lot of visuals and was engaging, but it wasn't the same type of venue. And that's okay. And students need to know that there's different ways that they can do that. Of course, they also need to consider their content, right? How things are organized, visual aids, and appearance. So this is things that you could let your students know that they need to consider, kind of consider that rubric as they are building a speech and planning for it. They really do need to consider these things. If you say, okay, here's what you need to teach me, create your presentation, go. And you don't really have things for them to, all you are thinking about is the content, for example, it might not be organized. I will say too, that creating multimedia presentations, when my students started using Keynote, my sixth graders, they started using Keynote to create presentations, their writing improved. And the organization of their writing. And the reason was, what they noticed was, my first slide is basically kind of my main idea. Like, this is what I'm going to talk about. And then my next slide, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail. And so it kind of helps them, and that slide better have, it's going to have like a subtopic and then details about that subtopic. And so what they noticed was their writing needed to be the same way. So if they had a paragraph where they all of a sudden switched topics, that's not the way we're supposed to be writing. So their writing did improve that way, which was pretty exciting. And that was something I didn't expect. It just kind of happened. And what was really exciting was there were students, there was a student that made that connection. There was a student that said, hey, that's like when we're writing paragraphs, that's how we need to organize our paragraphs. So that was very exciting to see. And so I would encourage you to make that connection for the students so that they can see that. This next slide, I added an additional picture because it's important that students speak in different ways, and not just building speeches, but impromptu type speeches are important as well. So this is a picture of a couple of my sixth graders that I taught a few years ago that were very excited about something that I had they had learned from the teacher next door, actually. And so what they said was, they came up to me and they said, oh, Ms. Goyette, we're so excited that we learned about, they were talking about area models in math for multiplication. And they said, can we teach the class? And some of you may have had your students ask you that. And so I said, okay, you're excited. You want to share your learning? Great. Absolutely, you can teach the class. This is not something that they had practiced and built ahead of time. It was kind of an impromptu thing. And I will tell you that it was exciting, but there were some learning, I failed forward, as Corey Orlando would say, give her a shout out. I failed forward a little bit in this because I said, great, go ahead on up there, guys. And so they were passionate and they were good at talking it through, but I will say they wanted to go on and on and on. So one thing I learned talking about instructional minutes and pacing, I learned next time you say, you've got 10 minutes, go, that's it, or 5 minutes, however much time you have. I'm sorry, but if you don't finish, that's it. pacing's very, very important, especially when you start doing these presentations. And so sometimes teachers will say, but they didn't finish. They will get quicker. They will get more effective at that. The other thing, learning that I experienced was what I noticed as they were doing this, what was the rest of the class doing? They were really actively engaged. How did I know that they were actually learning what these students were teaching them? I had no way of making sure that they were not pretending to pay attention, for example. And so in a bit, I'm going to talk to you about some technology tools that I learned to use to make sure that those students were all engaged while the other students were up there speaking. So I'll go over that in a second. So how do we make sure that our students know how to speak publicly, that they do that well? It's something that we don't realize that has to actually be taught. It really does. And so this is something Eric Palmer is, if you can look him up on Twitter. He's someone that is a great person to follow on Twitter, and he created this is a rubric that was created based on his book. And so he has this acronym PV legs: poise, voice, life, eye contact, gestures, and speed. And if we focus on these things and we teach students these things, then they will have the skills to effectively engage in public speaking. This is a rubric that a teacher I know created based on that book for third graders. It's something that if you click on this link, if you are in the presentation, the short URL that I shared, it actually came from Adam Waters' account, but on the top of the chat there, on slide 8, if you click on the picture here, if you click on the picture of the document, it will take you to that document so that you can see it. You could certainly, I've had teachers that will make this a little bit more complex for older students or make it a little bit more simple for the younger students. But this is, if you start working on these things, now students know, oh, this is what it means to speak publicly effectively. A lot of times what happens is we tell students, you know, they perform a speech and we think, gosh, that's so hard. Public speaking's so hard. And so they perform this speech and it wasn't very good. Let's be honest. It kind of sucked, right? I mean, they were quiet. It didn't sound good. They didn't have any life to them. They didn't use any gestures. They didn't make eye contact with the audience. But what do? We feel bad for them. And we say, because we know that they were so uncomfortable. And so what we say is, oh, that was a good try. That's really hard to do. Good job. Is that helping kids? That's saying, oh, well, it's hard, so that's okay. I'm glad you tried. That's not really helping them. That's not building their capacity. That's not preparing them for the future. What we have to do is teach them the skills so they know what to do. And that's what this rubric can do for us. This teacher, this is the class that was on the news that I talked about earlier. And what this teacher did was this teacher would focus on, you know, maybe one of those portions a week. So she'd talk about poise for about a week. And every time she was speaking, you know, as you're speaking in front of your students, make sure that you model this too, right, as a teacher. And then they would start to have conversations and they would talk about this. What's really cool is once they did this, once they had this rubric, it gave them specific ways to provide feedback to their peers and to self-assess. Now, I said that when students are up at the front giving that multimedia presentation, what is everyone else doing? The students had a copy of that rubric. You'll see in the picture here where the students are, they're holding the rubric. So the rubric was on kind of like dry erase, and they would check off
the things that the student did, and then they would go into Google Classroom. You could also do this in Edmodo. I did this with my students in Edmodo. You could also use Celly, CEL.ly, which mimics Twitter, if you wanted to do it that way. But all students would go in and they would be responsible for providing feedback to their peers. Now, in my 6th grade classroom, I tried this, and they didn't really know what to say. Speak louder. It sounded good. I like it. You're cool. Like, they didn't really know. You have to teach kids what is appropriate feedback to give. And so having that rubric allows them to have specific feedback that they can provide to their peers based on their public speaking. So you'll see in the screenshot there, that's from a Google Classroom, and this is from real students. And so they're providing each other those feedback. You'll see, Esmeralda said, Laisha used just the right volume for the space. She also had hand movement, hand motions. She speaks every word. So they're providing that feedback for them. And this is great too for your struggling readers and writers, because they can take that rubric and feel comfortable writing. Now, I talked in my description that about making sure that there's 100% engagement while students are giving presentations. What I've seen is that when you have either a Google Classroom or a Twitter or a Celly or an Edmodo, where all students can see all of their peers' answers in real time, your engagement goes up, because I don't want to be the only one not doing it. And I know that my teacher is going to be watching in real time. It's not like, okay, afterwards, I'm going to have to put some notes real quick. I can see what's going on. It also helps with those lower readers, because if you're basically crowdsourcing, right? So you're taking your entire class. If your entire class is taking notes and they can see everybody else's, if I had an idea of what I thought was the right answer and I'm looking at everybody else's answers, I can go, oh wait, I was way off. I was way wrong, right? And so it's really a way to get kids to teach each other as well. You have that internal accountability because they know everyone's watching. I was in a high school class and with a newer teacher, and I was coaching this teacher, and I said, let's give them the option with Google Classroom. They can either, he was going to do a foldable, and then the other option was to use Google Slides. And what he said was, you're going to have to, if you do the Google, if you do the Google Slides, you're going to show your learning, you're going to need to put it on Google Classroom so that your peers can see it. What he didn't say was that if you did the foldable, you're going to take a picture and put that on Google Slides. So only one student decided to go with the technology model, to go with the Google Slides option. And I said, do you know why they did that? And he says, no, I was really surprised. I said, it's because they don't want their peers to have to see what they did. If their peers see their answers, all of a sudden that internal accountability goes up, and they're going to be more likely to try harder and to come up with a better product. And so that's what this does. That's what this does. This engages our students in doing something and evaluating each other, giving each other formative feedback in real time while it's going on. If you have the technology to be able to do that, to use Google Classroom or Edmodo or whatever in real time, that's awesome. If you don't have a one-to-one environment, another option is to allow kids to come up to the whiteboard and write something, or put Post-it notes and put them up there throughout the presentation, so that, and make sure, hey, you've got to have at least 1 or 2 Post-its up by the end of the presentation. That's an option as well that I've seen teachers do. This is an example of 2nd graders. It's a video. The sound is a little off, but you can watch this later. And they're using that same type of rubric. It had been simplified a bit, but it was based on the PV legs. So even our youngest students can do this. Even our kindergartners, we can talk to them about eye contact. We can talk to them about gestures. It does not need to be older students. That's still fine.
So this is I found this on YouTube. I do not know who this student is, but if you watch this video, I'm just going to play it for a moment so that you can kind of see what the,
Hi, I'm Emily Johnson, and I'm going to be talking about the different areas in the marketing industry. So the first area that I want to talk about is
I'm just going to stop right there. So how many times have you seen presentations like this in classrooms? I think it's a lot more common than uncommon, sadly. But why is that? I don't blame the student. I don't blame the student. I blame the teacher. And I really don't blame even that one teacher that had this student. I blame all of us. We don't focus on public speaking. And it's not just the public speaking. That's a big part of it, right? A big part of it is this student doesn't know that, in PV Legs, one of the things on the rubric talks about avoiding distracting behaviors. Okay, and this student was twirling her hair. Does she even realize that she shouldn't be doing that? Does she even realize she should be making eye contact? My guess is that after this presentation, she's obviously very nervous, right? But she doesn't have the skills. I doubt she even knows why her public speaking is so bad as it says, right? And so my guess is that this teacher afterwards said, "Oh, nice try, honey. It's really hard to go up and speak in front of everyone. You made a good effort." That's my guess. That's not teaching. That's not teaching. That's keeping kids down. We've got to give them skills. We got to teach them how to be better public speakers. So using that PV Legs rubric, teaching them those skills, and then having the rest of the class provide feedback via Google Classroom or Edmodo or Seesaw, which I'll show an example of in a second. That's how we can really get our kids to that next level. Now, it's not just about the speaking itself. That's important. It's really important. And PV Legs really helps with that. But sometimes even the presentations themselves, I saw nothing behind her. I saw no visuals. As a student that's watching, I want to see something. You may notice in this presentation, think about it. Did you see any bullet points? Are these slides text heavy? They made this one actually a little bit more text heavy than I prefer, but people remember images. They remember images. And students need to realize that their presentations can't just be a lot of words. How many times have you seen students read their PowerPoint slides to you? And I'll be honest. I've seen teachers do it. I've even seen presentations given at the state level, Department of Education presentations, where they read the slides to the audience. And the audience is full of teachers that have at least a bachelor's degree and a credential, if not a master's. So these people have advanced degrees, and yet they're reading their slides to us. I've sat there. That's boring. Do you want people, if you as an adult don't want to be the slides read to you, it kind of insults your intelligence, right? And do you remember all that? Probably not. Don't do that to your students, and don't teach your students to do that to each other. Visuals. Visuals are huge, right? There is a book called Presentation Zen that's excellent at showing how to give great presentations. And they talk about the importance of visuals and less text. I was in a session with a tech coach out of the Rockland, California, Sacramento area in California, Ryan O'Donnell, and he talks about taking, when he first started teaching, you got to model this for your students, right? If you're teaching, reading your slides and reading your PowerPoints, your students are going to do the same thing because they're going to think that's what you want, right? So Ryan talks about years ago, he'd have tons of slides for his PowerPoints, right? And so he was all excited about it. He would lecture and history teacher, great teacher. And then what he noticed as he moved along was as his teaching got more effective and kids were more engaged and the kids were doing more of the thinking, what happened was he started using more visuals and less text. And so he actually showed us how he takes a single image and he'll spend a few lessons on that image, close reading the image. And I thought, how powerful is that to show kids that it's not all about all these bullet points and PowerPoints that look all fancy and about transitions and all this. That's not what it's about, right? So if your teaching improves, if your presentation, so to speak, as a teacher gets more effective, then your student presentations will get better too. And so I love that story, and I loved what Ryan said about all of that. And make sure to follow him on Twitter, by the way. I think his Twitter handle is CreativeEdTech, @CreativeEdTech. It's not just about presenting in front of the class. There are other ways that we can just I think you got to get kids talking, presenting, leveraging the power of video and authentic audiences. You can do this in many different platforms. This is an example from a 4th grade classroom using Seesaw. So these students, what they did was they created something using low tech, right? So you'll see in the picture that they all collaboratively in a group created in math. It's just so important to visualize our math. Maths are visual, as Joe Bowler says, and so it's important that we draw visuals of our mathematical thinking. And so these students did that on poster paper, right, which is low tech. Then they spread out in different parts of the room. These students actually went outside. And one of the students was required to explain their thinking. And then they recorded it, put it on Seesaw so that it went into the class feed. And then other students would comment about it. So they're giving each other that peer feedback, right? Now, you could have them give the peer feedback on their presentation itself on the public speaking portion of it, or you could have them give peer feedback based on their mathematical thinking or whatever subject you happen to teach. And so that's something you could do as well. What was really cool, again, you're leveraging the power of an authentic audience. If I know that it's not only going to be videotaped, but I know that all of my classmates are going to see it, I'm going to work harder. Now, you don't have to use Seesaw. You could also use Google Classroom and have them submit their video directly into Google Classroom. You have to make sure in your classroom stream that your students are able to post and comment. Sometimes teachers get afraid to do this. They say, what if one of my students goes in and says something inappropriate? Well, guess what? You can, in Google Classroom, mute a particular student or set of students. So that, another thing you can do is add your administrator as a co-teacher on your account and say, guess what? That administrator's watching. Now, they're not going to have time to watch y'all, but just knowing that they could, if the students know that, it makes them think a little bit more first. I was in a you can also do this in Edmodo. I was in a high school classroom, and it was a math class. And what we did was we said, they were reviewing for a test. And I said, I asked the teacher, what is it that you want the students to do? Well, I want them to teach each other. I want them to show what they learn. I want them to kind of do error analysis on this assessment, this pre-assessment, so that they can get ready for the final test. And so what we did was we gave them options. Google Classroom was the place where everything had to be uploaded so that they could all see everything, but they had options. You can create a screencast, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can create a video. You can create a Google Slides presentation and talk over it. You can do whatever you want. And so what was really exciting was there were some students there was a student that there were students that wrote on the whiteboard and they videotaped it. They uploaded it to YouTube, unlisted, so it's safe, like we talked about earlier. And then they went ahead and put it on the Google Classroom stream so everyone could see it. What was the coolest part about this was that the kids, they would record themselves and then they say, oh, wait, I didn't explain that well. I need to do it again. And so again, just like I talked about the repeated readings, students don't want to do repeated readings. What if our kids had to really, you videotape what they're doing, their mathematical thinking, all of a sudden they're like, wait, I listened to that and that doesn't make sense. I'm not quite sure. I think I have to do that again, right? And so leveraging the power of the video like that really forces them to think about if what they're teaching makes sense. I mentioned screencasting, and what screencasting does is it records what's happening on your screen and your voice at the same time. So if you have Chromebooks, you can use Screencastify. It's an extension, so you go to the Chrome Web Store. And by the way, I'm throwing out a lot of ideas and a lot of tools. If you're not quite sure about any of these things, tweet me, email me, ask me, but I bet if you just go to YouTube and you look up a YouTube tutorial, you'll be able to figure it out too. Just saying, hashtag. So yeah, using Screencastify, if you have Chromebooks, is a way, or if you just use the Chrome browser, if you've got desktops, that'll work. If you have iPads, Educreations and Explain Everything, and Seesaw as well, actually, will allow you to do the same thing. And so when kids hear themselves speak on video, all of a sudden their speaking gets better because they hear things. This is really good for your ELs, for your English learners. This is great for them because they haven't heard themselves speak enough. They don't even know what it sounds like. This is an example from Susan Stewart out of Central California, who has an example of a kindergartner screencasting. And so when you click on the link for that's listed up there, the short URL, the goo.gl, that is case sensitive, by the way, so you'll need to make sure that you use the appropriate capital letters and lowercase letters. This shows that even our kindergartners can do this, even our kindergartners. Here's an example of some high schoolers that are screencasting. And this is actually some true examples of them doing it. This is in an ELD class, so our English learners. And so what was so exciting about this was the students, they're reading, and so they're working on their fluency, but when they play it again, they say, oh, let me read that again, right? And that's something that if you're not recording it, if you're not videoing it, they're not going to want to read it again. That's boring, right? This is a blog talking about screencasting, among other things, in ELD. So I encourage you to look at that. All right. And then I just want to let you know as well that I've got the next few slides on the presentation talk a lot just about listening. This is something that, I do an entire interactive 3-hour course on what we just talked about, but also I started with a listening portion and how important it is to listen. And to be honest, I think focusing on that first is the most effective way to go. So, you know, go through those slides at your leisure if you'd like to. If you're going to have students listening to each other as they are giving those presentations, listening is really something that we don't realize, we take advantage of. It really does need to be taught. And so what are some of those things that teach kids? How can we teach kids how to listen? And so, you know, those, I don't have time to go over that too much today, but it's something that you can certainly look through as you're at your leisure, making sure that kids are able to go back and listen again and take notes as they're doing that. So this is kindergartners, right? And they're learning, just like we learned with the PV legs about eye contact. When you're listening, same thing. Kids have to learn how to do that. They have to learn how to give that attention, how to give those encouraging words, how to paraphrase, how to summarize. And these kindergartners were able to do that. And these are English learners that came in not knowing a lot of English. And so it is something that certainly can be done. So I want to thank you for listening. And you know, hopefully you see this graphic here, you see this animated GIF. I just want to encourage you to teach your students, you know, about the PV legs and get them involved in those student presentations as they're listening so that your class doesn't look like this. All right, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And as always, feel free to tweet out at me, email me with any questions. And thanks so much for being here with us.